So you guys seem to like my tutorial on how to make the Spy's Disguise Kit from Team Fortress 2. So today I thought I'd show you how to make Biker's Meat Cleaver from Hotline Miami. Here's what you're going to need for this build. A thin sheet of foam core, a thin plank of wood, brown and metallic silver paint, hot glue, various cutting instruments, paint brushes, a drill, various drill heads, a drilled disc sander, this isn't required but blue masking tape, plumber's epoxy, and some screws. The first thing I did was trace my piece of foam core into two halves and then cut it straight down the middle. These two pieces of foam would serve as the blade for our meat cleaver. The next thing I did was trim the edges to the way I liked them. You can trim the edges as much as you want and do whatever you feel that you need to do with them for whatever sort of meat cleaver you're going to be making. For me, I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I wanted to make it look as real as possible, which as you can see was not too real. But I did trim for a while and I gave it my best shot. The next thing I did was cut the piece of wood into four parts. This is going to serve as the handle for our meat cleaver, and what I did was I took two of those four parts and hot glued them together. One thing I would definitely suggest doing is make sure your hot glue gun actually works. The next thing I did was sanded down the edges to make them less jagged. After this, I traced the handle into the meat cleaver to see how I liked it. Used the blue tape just so I could get it stuck there, and then I hot glued the edges of the meat cleaver together. I did this to basically sharpen up the edges of the meat cleaver, and then I sanded them down a bit just to make it look the way I wanted to. I found it easiest to use just the regular old piece of sandpaper rather than the drill sander, just because mine was a little broken. Another good tactic that I found to sharpen up the side was to use my cutting knife and just sort of slide it across the side. As you can see, it made it look a little weird, but when I put the paint on, it didn't look as weird. The next thing I did was I painted the handle brown. I did this a couple times. I would recommend maybe 2 coats. The same for the blade, which I painted with the metallic silver paint. I painted both sides about 2 times before I was ready to do anything else with them. Next thing I did was I hot glued the handle to the inside of the meat cleaver. Now what I noticed was there's still a lot of space in the meat cleaver that is open. So what I decided to do with that was I used the plumber's epoxy inside that area to sort of fill it up. This was really hard to do, and it just sort of annoyed me. I still don't like the way that part of it came out, but in the long run, if you're doing this, using this for fast-paced scenes, no one should really notice, but still, it looked really bad. If you can come up with a better way, I would try using it, but I just used plumber's epoxy and hot glue to fill in this gap. Again, not the ideal way of doing it, but that's what I had to work with, and that's what I did. I sanded it down to sort of try and make it look the way I wanted to, but that did not really help too much, but it made it look a little bit better. But again, really, there's probably a better way to do this than what I did, but in any case, next thing I did was paint that silver, and while I was at it, I added a few more coats of paint to the meat cleaver. You can never have too much paint on your meat cleaver. Next thing I did was I drew a circle at the top and then drilled a hole in it. This is sort of what all meat cleavers have nowadays, I guess. Just sort of the hole. I then used a paintbrush to sort of smoothen out the inside of the hole, and then I painted it with more metallic silver paint. After this, I painted the heads of the screws I had. For some odd reason, they were not already. Next thing I did was I drilled 3 holes into the handle of the meat cleaver and then drilled those screws in by hand. This isn't actually necessary, it just kind of makes your meat cleaver look a little bit more realistic, and it also helps when you're throwing it around with balance. I found it was a lot easier to throw it up in a circle and catch it. I then added some more brown paint just for good measure, and then I was finished. If you followed this tutorial, you should have a pretty nice looking made of foam meat cleaver. Like I said earlier, this prop doesn't look exactly like it should. I'm not really a professional prop maker. As you can see, this part of the meat cleaver is pretty weird looking, and the edge is a little just eh. But if your actor is moving really quickly, the audience shouldn't be able to tell. But I do recommend getting a meat cleaver that looks a lot like this, or basing your model off of that meat cleaver. But yeah, hope this helped you guys a lot, and I will see you later.